When you think about skills and tools that might help you deal with chronic stress or begin to heal trauma, talking and listening might not be at the top of the list of skills you think of. However, talking and listening can be very powerful tools as you begin to unpack this heavy backpack you might be carrying based on a profession that exposes you to the trauma of others. Today, I'm going to talk to you about some of the people that I've worked with and spoken to over the years who say talking and or listening have been important healing tools for them. Hello and welcome to the Pause First Academy channel. I'm Kim Colegrove. I'm an author and the owner of Pause First Academy, where I offer stress management and resilience training. All right, let's get on with it. Today I'm going to read to you from chapter 5 of one of my books, the book called Mindfulness for Warriors, and we're going to talk about storytelling, talking, and listening. But before we get to that, I want to talk to you about my peer sources list. In my book, Wellness Warrior Style, I pulled together all of the resources that the 24 or so people that I've interviewed for my books told me they used to get and stay well. And I call these peer sources. So these peer sources I've grabbed from your peers. So people who have done the difficult jobs you do, people who understand the mental and emotional toll that these jobs can take. They have shared which tools and practices and skills have worked for them along the way. So one of the things that was listed by the people that I interviewed for my books was telling your story. All right, so this is where we're going to start talking about talking. And I've heard this from a lot of people over the years, that they held everything in, kept everything bottled up for a long time. They didn't want to talk about their mental and emotional issues, the trauma they were experiencing, for multiple reasons. Some people say, I was afraid if I started talking about it, it would all just bubble up and explode. And, I'd never be able to put that toothpaste back into the tube, or it might overcome me. That's sort of common. Other people said, they were afraid for their peers or their agencies or organizations or people around them to think there was something wrong with them, to think they were weak or crazy or those kind of terms. If you've had a difficult job and so you've got some emotional stuff going on, you're burdened somewhat by chronic stress or some of the trauma that you've been exposed to, and you're someone who just keeps it in and just plows ahead, just keeps going, and you haven't talked about some of this stuff, I'm hoping that I can encourage you by the end of this video to find at least one trusted person that you can open up to and start talking. And real quick, as kind of a side note, I thought as long as we were here talking about the peer sources section of my book, that I might just throw up this list for you to take a quick look at. You're welcome to take a screenshot if you want to. So let's look at some of these skills and tools and resources from my peer sources list. Meditation, mindfulness, breathing, other contemplative practices, counseling, therapy, private and group therapy, EMDR therapy, journaling, writing, there's talking and listening, exercise, fitness, staying active, having the right people around you, and so on and so on. And if you keep reading through the list, you get to telling your story. So these people have shared that both talking about things and listening to others talk about things have been helpful for them, and how it's been important for them to be able to tell their story. I'm going to start by talking about talking and the power of storytelling, because I have a section here on page 59 where I talk about the power of storytelling. And the stories of these 24 people that I've interviewed across my books, they're the difference makers. These people and their stories and their willingness to openly and vulnerably tell their true stories is what's making the difference for people. All right. So here's what I want to share with you. Here's what I say about talking and sharing your stories, storytelling. I said, I've noticed that when one person is courageous enough to speak the truth about their struggles and pain, they create an opening for the next person to speak up. It's like the it's like the courage is contagious. Suddenly, someone else who has kept their suffering bottled up feels safe enough to share their experiences and feelings because they no longer feel alone. This causes a chain reaction of sharing, caring, support, and community that serves to heal the invisible wounds. And I've noticed this in group after group, organization after organization. The ones who are kind of the wellness leaders or the leaders of like healing and peer support in that, I've noticed that very frequently they're kind of the informal leaders of the organizations. They're a leader because they were willing to stand up, take a step forward, and openly share their story, allow themselves to be vulnerable no matter how painful that was or how difficult that was. That single step created a permission structure for people around them. All right, so going on, I say when one person steps forward and says, I'm hurting, it paves the way for others to step forward as well. People need to be seen, valued, and validated. I believe this is human nature, not a flaw or a weakness. When courageous people share what has happened to them and how it is affecting them, others feel safe to say they're hurting too. If everyone remains silent, then everyone thinks everyone else is doing okay but them. That's epidemic. This deepens the feelings of shame and the fear that they will be seen, I can't read my own words, that they will be seen as weak, and this nonsense is killing people. Verbally sharing lived experience of trauma can be cathartic and healing for both the speaker and the listener. So, in terms of talking or telling your story, what I'll recommend to you, and I know this is hard for a lot of people, and it's a very individual decision. Of course, I'm going to recommend therapy. Talk therapy is not for everybody, but you won't know if it's for you or not unless you give it a chance. But if you can, just for starters, find one trusted person that you can begin to talk to. One thing I can tell you for sure is that year over year, if you keep all this stuff bottled up, if the way you get through is to compartmentalize, and so you've been able to hold stuff in, just like kind of shove it down, put it into a box, put the lid on that box and tuck it away. And that's how you can move forward and work your next shift and go to the next day and do the next thing. I will tell you that's only sustainable until it's no longer sustainable. And you don't get to pick the day that it's no longer sustainable. It'll come out of left field. And so I just would like you to consider that. And I can tell you almost for sure that you can't go through a 25 or 30 plus year career doing difficult work that exposes you to trauma and the trauma of others and then retire happily and healthfully if you don't find some kind of a way to process some of what you've seen and endured and some of what you've witnessed, find some way to process it and deal with the mental and emotional aspect or the mental and emotional weight that you've carried around that. Now let's move on and talk about listening. This is not something that I had really considered myself. It wasn't on my list of resources that I wanted to research and learn more about for trauma exposed professionals. But in my book, Wellness Warrior Style, I interviewed somebody by the name of William, and William's become a friend, and he's a really great guy. And I interviewed him about his time in the military. And so let's see, William's on page 54 of Wellness Warrior Style. And I'm going to go back to the section where I ask these people what tools they found that were helpful for them, what tools they continue to use. So this is the segment on page 59 called Tools. And this is where he talks about listening. So he did mention talking in his list. He mentioned meditation, reading self-help material. And he's got a whole list of things that he used. And he said talking. He said being vulnerable with people was difficult for or is difficult for him, but he knows it's important. So he did list that. And then he listed listening. Let me read this to you. He calls it active listening. William defines active listening as a skill, and he places it right up there with meditation. He started by reading books about how to develop listening skills. He focuses on being an active listener whenever someone opens up to him. He says being a good active listener requires your attention, and he adds, there's no better way to develop discipline around attention than to practice meditation. He's certain that cultivating these skills has made him a better husband, dad, and friend. To be a good active listener does not mean to always have an answer or a response, because people aren't always looking for an answer or a response. They're not asking you for anything. They simply need to talk. And like I said a minute ago, people need to be heard and seen and validated. So listening, active listening is an important skill. There's something called holding space. I don't know if you've ever had any therapy or worked in a group um, or you've ever heard this term, but it's called holding space. And so it's really about just being there for the person and kind of creating a container or a space for them to kind of dump some of their stuff into. So allowing them to talk and let some stuff out and emote if they need to and cry if they need to, gives them a place to put that. And you're just there creating that space for them to do so, but not trying to fix their problems, not interrupting them, not talking over them, not giving them the solutions, just listening and being there for them and with them. And that can be so healing. So I hope I've given you some things to think about. I hope I've sparked your interest in terms of opening up and starting to talk about things. If you're enjoying my content, please take a second to tap that thumbs up and give me a like. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. And you can also hit the bell if you want to be notified when I upload new videos. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you very much, and I will see you on the next video.